Dr. Tommy Rhee, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Hey, Bradley. All right. I appreciate that, man. I'm excited about this conversation.
Likewise, likewise. Perhaps a good place to start is with a question around some of the work you've been doing, which is what is cell-free regenerative medicine? How is it different from traditional stem cell therapy?
Well, stem cell therapy, you hear the word like cells, right? And then it leads to that word live cells. And then you hear a lot of people talking about, I'm getting these 10 million live cells in my body. Well, those cells are like just like a typical biology days. You have the cell itself, and you have a little bunch of helper cells, and you got that thing in the middle called nucleus. That has the actual components in there, and the DNA and all those kind of like those ability to like replicate into something. Well, you don't want that in there. That's live cells. So when you think about the word cell free, you're eliminating that component, which is the DNA, the one that can replicate into something. Because you have to understand that we're not really trying to have that tissue that's donated by a site called the umbilical cord in Wharton's jelly. That's you don't want that to kind of like turn into your cell and mutate because you don't know what's going to turn into. You don't know what it's code for. It's very tough to have that chromosome match up to your chromosome and its coding. So it's about the signals. So you eliminate that component of it, and then you have to get the signals that they secrete. So all these live cells secrete something called EVs, extracellular vesicles, in the form of proteins, enzymes, cytokine. You hear peptides, those things, and that's what you want. You want the information that doesn't have that nucleus. Hence the word cell-free.
Got it. So maybe for people who are not fully aware of what stem cell therapy actually is, so you're actually injecting stem cells obtained from somewhere directly into your body, and then they're rejuvenating that tissue in theory.
Yeah, in theory. I mean, here's a funny thing about the mechanism. You really don't know what's going on in there. If you ask anybody, they talk about it differentiates, it knows how to identify what the target tissue is and turn into that tissue. They say it's a miracle type of cell that just knows what to do. But then you ask, what is it? How does it know? And then they can't really explain it. So if you just understand the concept of like normal biology and mitosis and cell division, and just think about, well, if you have a code in the existing tissue that's going to turn into its daughter cell, it's going to duplicate its exact self. Now, how's it going to go into that portion of its exact self when you have this other target tissue that you're trying to heal to match up? It's not going to do it. So then you have to take the next step. You have to think about the signal. It's got to signal something. And that's what our body's all about. We always want signal in the form of hormones, peptides, proteins, information. We're always doing something based on the signal. And then you have to activate that side of that signaling. So that's what this is all about cell to cell communication, which is called the paracrine effect. You want to have that communication in that manner.
So what we're doing is optimizing the communication, the body's language in a way to help it do whatever it needs to do rather than just exogenous stuff like just injecting. Because if you inject stem cells in a clinic in Mexico or something like that, what about the DNA in those cells? It's not your DNA. So what actually happens inside of the body?
See, that's where the story gets kind of confusing because when you go to somewhere like Mexico, Central America, and you get this type of injection, first of all, you have to think the sourcing, right? The sourcing is not really regulated. Like in the United States, we have sort of a wild, wild west scenario, but the FDA does regulate some of the procedures that when you look at this injectables, they don't want you to harvest the tissue. They don't want you to grow in the petri dish and re-inject in your area of damage. But in Mexico, it's different. I mean, it's basically there's no regulation. You can do whatever you want to, and you don't know even the sourcing of this type of tissue. It could be from like what it's supposed to be from the umbilical cord, the gelatinous material around that umbilical cord called Wharton's jelly. Well, you can also get it from other tissue that you don't know where you're getting. And then does it work? Who's gonna check it? I mean, what are you got a microscope, you're gonna look at it yourself? You're just gonna trust the physician and the clinic. So you don't know what's going on. There are cases out there that are using bovine tissue, animal tissue, sometimes vaginal tissue. That's not really that portion of the umbilical cord that has the highest concentration of the stem cell called mesenchymal stem cell. So you don't know what you're getting. Now, it's a great process and a great concept. It's just that it's not regulated correctly. That's the danger. When you go to a third world country, you're kind of guessing at what's going on.
And harvesting stem cells from an adult is obviously a little bit more challenging. Fat cells, I mean, if you inject your own stem cells, slightly less risk, I suppose.
Yeah, less risk. But the thing is that you have to look at the age. So if you're a 50-year-old man and then you have the same signal in your body as the donated tissue from your own adipose or fat tissue and you re-inject it, well, the signal's there, but it's not as strong as like an umbilical cord that grows real fast. You want that bright signal, that very, that immature tissue.
So what got you interested in this? And then we'll talk about biological signaling and some of the things you've discovered. So tell us a little bit about your background, what got you interested in this area?
Well, I've been in sports med for a long time. Back in 2007, 8 with UCLA with those athletes. And when they graduate, they go in the pro world, and then you start seeing what their protocols are to recover. So when you understand what they're trying to do, get back on the field or off season, recovery, then you start getting involved with regenerative medicine. And then you see it evolve. It evolves from the portion of like the rudimentary world of like prolotherapy, then PRP, and then stem cell, and now where it's going into this donor tissue called mesenchymal stem cell from the Wharton's jelly. So I've seen it, and I've seen these athletes, and that allowed me to go travel with these guys, and then you start going to these training facilities and understanding what they do. Then you offer it, and you just stay ahead of the kind of curve to see what the latest and greatest for these therapies. Then it allowed me to go to like the professional arena, Olympic level, and then you just understand that it's all about recovery. Working out, doing training, and any type of aggressive stuff, gameplay, that's not the complicating thing. It's how to get back to 100% quick as possible so you can go back into that workout or game scenario. That's the secret. People really understand about the workout. It's the recovery that's very like the vague and kind of like the gray area that we're trying to define faster.
It's very interesting. And so you worked with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, UCLA Athletics, and a history in the Navy as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the Navy was a good starting point. I flew in the Navy, had a great time. It helped me mature and put some good standards in my mind. So then I just it's an easy thing. The military is a great starting point for someone that was like me. It's kind of like rebellious. You kinda knew things, but you're the dangerous person that, little knowledge is too dangerous. Well, that was me. So the military really set its kinda like this boundaries of how to become a person of learning when you just take these micro steps, and then with that, you can apply it to anything.
And tell us a little bit about Regen, your organization. What do you actually do?
Well, because of this whole development of these recovery for these athletes, the one thing that there's a tough thing with regenerative medicine. There's only one way of delivering this type of like information signaling stem cells is injectables. Now, the tough thing with injectable is that there's downtime, there's risk factors, and there's cost. So these athletes will always talk to me about I can't do stem cells during the season because there's like 2, 3 weeks of downtime, and that takes me into that world of like sitting out those games. In the NFL, when you sit back and understand about the contract and see where it's based on performance, not guaranteed money, well, they have to play. They have to continually play. And then, worst case scenario, if you're negotiating your contract, you don't want to be injury prone. So they don't want to address it. So they would rather do like a pain management, mask the pain instead of actually like, fixing it. So once I heard about that type of scenario about the injectables slowing down their recovery process and not going into that world, then I said there's got to be a better way of delivering this. So that's when I looked into every kind of like, possible like delivery mechanism. There's nasal, there's all kinds of things, but the thing that I want to do is go localized, and that's how topical came about. So once I understood about topical, then it's all about like understanding about how to get the actual skin, right? To get through that dermis and go through those 3 layers, and then understand that, and then understand about what am I really want? Do I want the stem cells, or do I want the little cell-free molecules that does the signaling? I wanted those. So it's a smaller molecule. Now it's easier to get it through the 3 layer skin once I had a transdermal agent. Once I understood that, now it's time to actually, develop this cream and then apply it. So I was lucky enough that I had people in the NFL world to test it out and give me the R&D world, like they would test it out, it goes, turn it up, turn it down, and they would tune it up. The neat thing about this is that my last subject that really helped me perfect it was an NFL quarterback. Now, he was dealing with Achilles tendonitis real bad, and then he was in his last year contract. So he had no choice. He couldn't identify to his medical staff that I have an injury. it's like when you go into a contract, that's a negotiation piece. They'll say, well, you're injured, you're prone to this. I can't give you that money, but I can, so that he didn't want that factor in. So we worked together and then we really tuned it into where he feels great about it. And the great thing about that is outcome, he played the whole season, he didn't report it, and he got a great contract. So everything worked out great. So once I saw that side of that aggressive athlete dealing with it and it recovered and healed, then I knew it's gonna be fantastic for the everyday person. And that's how regen was developed. It's pretty much it's a void in the world that I try to fill.
That sounds awesome. I mean, things like Achilles tendonitis are that's a career ender for many people because it's just too painful to deal with. So you create a kind of lotion, you apply it to that area, it penetrates the skin and actually helps support the signaling that's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's all about the signal. If you can get the signal to where the tissue needs, sometimes where our tissues, when you go into like the aging process, we slow down that healing process. Or when we injury, of course, you go the slower process or fast process. It's all determined on the signal. Our tissue is there waiting in dormant state to say, what do I do? I need something to do. And it's waiting for that information. So we have our tissues that are sitting by trying to get the signal. And these signals, as we age, they decrease. Now, when we have an injury that's pretty aggressive, well, you kind of sort of waste all those signals and you have to kind of, recycle them back up. And it takes time to go in that process. So if you can introduce your body to another signal that's stronger, brighter, well, there it goes. It tells your existing tissue, goes, do your job, activate and start doing your process.
And so there's active ingredients in the product that you've created that trigger that kind of response. Somehow the body, maybe you could talk us through the mechanism. How does it actually trigger that signal?
Okay, so when you have a cell, so let's say a cell is sitting there. For instance, like let's do an example of everybody knows about glucose and insulin, right? So there's so we have a receptor where we're trying to receive information. So a glucose floats around and we recognize that, and then we're gonna have to secrete something out of our pancreas or our parotid glands called insulin. And then insulin is what's going to actually grab that glucose and pull it into like the liver, the muscle. So it's just a receiver. So you're doing that paracrine, you're just kind of communicating cell to cell. Same thing with this thing. So when you look at the stem cells secrete this thing called EVs, extracellular vesicles. They have information like peptides, proteins, interleukin 10. You hear these little kind of these buzzwords in here. So when you start seeing these little teeny information, well, they're going around our body if we have an injury, we start secreting our body. The problem is that as we age and our potency is like decreased or the signal not strong, we don't send out that signal large enough. So then our existing tissues that's supposed to like grow muscle tissue, like a tissue they call satellite cell. A satellite cell is like an adult stem cells that creates more of this kind of myosin fibers, right? So what happens is it just sits dormant. It doesn't get that signal. So you have to bring in information to tell that satellite cell to do something. That's all about. It's trying to get more of that signaling to your existing tissue that's dormant to wake up and do its job.
Okay, really interesting. And are there other modalities that can also help with this, like massage, like actually just manipulating the tissue or red light therapy, things like that?
Yep, there's all so for instance, like there's a great one, red light therapy. Depends on the frequency. There's all different frequencies and wavelengths that you have to really hone into. There are some that activate the nitric oxide. There's some that actually like there's some that's a pain modulator. So there's all research on different wavelengths. It starts off from 680 to 808 to 960, 1080. It's a new it's kind of interesting. I'm not really sharp on those wavelengths in comparison to its a relative target tissue. But there are that process. So then you look at laser or photobiomodulation, they call that. So then you go into the world of like whole body vibration. That will actually activate a lot of neat things. And the neat thing about that, it activates nitric oxide. When you do that, now you're starting to engage that circulatory system that opens up the vessels. When you open up the vessels, now you get circulation. When you get circulation, now you got the transport of those signals around the body go quicker. So it's like a intermediate step or a beginning step to that actual event that you want to start doing that signaling of that tissue. Sometimes it doesn't get there. If you're a diabetic that have that kind of like that thicker blood because you have a lot of glucose and insulin that don't match up, so the viscosity of blood's thicker, and then you're not allowed to like vasodilate because you don't have that signal. Well, you're not going to get that target end down there where you're not getting that flow there. So you have to do either deplete that glucose and insulin or increase the vasodilation. And that's how you have to signal something called nitric oxide to open up those vessels. So it's all a lot of like mechanism steps. But yeah, absolutely. There's device of power plate, whole body vibration. There's piezo wave, shock wave that stimulates growth factors in your body. There's so many things that are out there. But the problem is that when you look at a person's age, you can wake up these signals, but they're not going to be as bright and strong as what you're trying to achieve. You want to achieve that strong message that something signals your information that go down to that target tissue, say, do something. And the neat thing about it is that you have that tissue from the Wharton's jelly that secretes those mesenchymal stuff secrete that kind of like the EVs, those cell-free things. Well, there's also plant-based that has cell-free that's equivalent to the signal. That's what we're excited about. So regen is moving into that world of botanica. That's where it's exciting because now you have an information that's similar to the ones from human tissue, a lot better at cost value, and it's safer too.
Interesting. And people have used these types of tools and technologies for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps, figuring out what can help you in different ways from nature. So, okay, great. So it's so interesting to think that this signaling through the body is optimal when you're a kid. And of course, you injure yourself, you heal almost within a day or a week, you're all good. And it's a lack of that signaling that actually starts to create problems. You don't heal as fast. Do people ever come to you and say, okay, so Dr. Tommy, what about from a aesthetic perspective, skin rejuvenation, because that's usually where these technologies go, right? So it's PRP. Okay, now you can get PRP for hair loss. Can you use these tools in a similar way for beauty?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's a tissue, right? Your skin, the dermis, that's an organ. Your muscles, the tendons, ligaments, same type of thing. You just need to get the existing type of tissue that's waiting to actually like regenerate. You got to wake it up. So because of the signal as we age decreases, just like anything else, things slow down. It's about getting the right information in there. So when you look at like cosmetic world and you want to think about that skin, you have to understand that the skin is been, you got environmental hazards in there, you got a couple of aging issues there, and then you have to just understand what your scenario is at. So once you understand that component of it, and then you just have to say, how do I wake up my existing tissue? And then, looking at PRP, they have its own benefits with that. That's where you draw off your own blood, put the centrifuge, and you try and get the growth factors out of there. So it's great. They call it like vampire facelift, with a micro needling in your face and do that aggressive stuff. But then there's other studies that said that if you eliminate the growth factors and the PRP component of it and just do micro needling, you have the same results because you're aggressively irritating tissue. When you irritate tissue, the first thing it wants to do, it wants to heal. It may take longer than younger people, but it will do its job. If we're going to heal, it's just that process of getting the right signal to heal.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And are there any risks of live stem cell treatments that people don't necessarily talk about or think about? I mean, we touched on that earlier on, but you hear on podcasts, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to go down that path and do it fully, immerse myself in that treatment. But do those treatments really last? I've heard short-term benefits, but then you have to keep going back and doing more.
Well, here's the thing with live cells. Nobody knows what's going on. Just imagine you're taking something just like a virus. A virus has DNA components in there. You're taking something in your body and you don't know what it's meant to do. You don't know what it's going to do. It's going to replicate into something. So it's a gamble. You'll hear stories like, I got sick after I got the therapy and then I felt better. Well, that sickness is because your body's trying to do something because it's just identify it's an antigen. So you want to create something to fight it. So you have to be careful. And here's a funny thing about like regenerative medicine, stem cell therapy, and live cell. So when you go to a clinic and you get, the stem cell therapy, they'll cryopreserve it. They'll put it in like a bath of nitrogen and they'll have it like at almost like I think it's 66 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you do the actual procedure, they'll either get it out with some type of procedure, but the thing is that it's solid. You have to get it into its liquid or gelatinous state, and then you mix it with saline solution. So they have to thaw it. When you thaw something from when the thing is supposed to be frozen in its live state and then, return it back to its live liquid state. Well, there's a stepping process. It's a very difficult, long process. It just doesn't go like what you'll see, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're ready to go. It's like, I think it's every 10 minutes, it's 5 degrees stepping process from negative 60 degrees all the way back to room temperature. It's a long process. So when you go there, you'll start seeing things like these guys will take the actual vial and put it in their hand, and then they'll have their own body temperature thawed out. That's too fast. It's called shock thaw. You kill it. Everything in there is dead. But here's the funny thing: it still works. Now you have to think, it has nothing to do with the live cells. Now you're looking at what it did. It sent out that information and to sit in that vial waiting for some receiver. So that's what that's all about. Now, once you understand about that procedure and you can look it up. Most of the cells are dead when you shoot it inside you, for regenerative medicine, but still works. People say, "Hey, I feel great. Everything worked out." Well, then here's the next question: what happened? Is it a placebo, or did it really, take care of that tissue?
Mm.
Well, of course, it took care of the tissue. It's not the cell. It's not the cells. It's the signals that really did its job.
Got it. Makes sense. And are there risks in using the wrong growth factor? I mean, what happens if you put the wrong growth factor? What kind of signaling happens?
Well, like anything else, when you get something in your body that has a DNA that's supposed to replicate, and it
Yeah.
doesn't do its proper replication, turns into another tissue, well, then you're going into the world of tumors. You're going in that world. So that's the risk factor. Everybody knows there's a risk when you do anything live in your body.
Yeah.
It's a gamble. Maybe some are willing to take, and others you just have to be aware of the risk factor. So I always say that if you take something that has the ability to do something and you put it in your body and it's not targeting the right place, well, you're going to start gambling there.
And do you have different formulas for different types of injuries, like a tendon versus a muscle, or is it a kind of a one size fits all?
Well, here's the thing. It's all about the signal, right? Your signals, you're looking for that message. The message is broadly stroked out into its EV spectrum. So with that, it has all the information. That information targets other tissues. When you have like a damaged tissue, the damaged tissue sits there and it signals. It signals out, I need help. So then, once you get the signals or the message, it's called honing. It hones into that area and it targets that area. Says, all right, this is what you need. So it's like a communication, two-way communication. So it doesn't just go one place. It goes just right to that spot.
Okay. So for those who are not aware how the signaling works, so let's say I'm going surfing, my surfboard hits me in the arm. There's a signaling process through nerves to say that something's painful, but there is another type of signaling of obviously going on behind the scenes, letting the rest of the body know we need to invest some effort into this area here to help it repair. Basically.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one sort of signaling, the nervous system, right? So you have one, it's called the sensory, what you feel, and then you have the motor that makes you say, hey, move, like put your hand on the fire, you feel the fire, and then that's the sensory. So the information is coming from the hand to the brain, and right away the brain to the hand, move it off that hot spot, right? So that's that form. When you look at like the extracellular side of it, cells have their capacity of sending out information. Help me, let's move. And then from the brain to the target tissue, we have things called hormones, right? Hormones tell our organs to do things. So it can be in the sense like, secrete, contract, do something. Well, hormones do that. It's a longer pathway. It's called the endocrine system. When you go cell to cell, now you're looking at something called the paracrine, where you have cells communicating right next to each other. And that's what you need. That's what this all regenerative medicine is all about. Get that paracrine information signaling to that existing damaged tissue to do its job.
Okay. What are some of the hurdles you face in creating products like this, creating a business like yours?
Man, let me tell you something. You got hurdles. Holy cow. I got Mount Everest in front of me. So the biggest thing that I have is, I'm first to the market. It's a great advantage of thinking like, hey, I got no competition. I mean, I'll have some in the future, but the thing with that is that when you're first in the market, well, it's great. The curse of it is that I have to educate people. I got to educate people about what stem cells are really about. People think stem cells heals, great. I got a million of those in my body, fantastic. But they don't know the mechanism. So when they talk about what I have, he goes, "How do you get live cells?" And I go, then I have to explain to 'em, what are live cells? No, you don't want live cells. You want the EVs, the information signals. And he goes, why do I want that? Then you have to go to this whole type of like, no, not a lecture, but just kind of like a conversation. So that's why I wrote a book about this whole information of signals and messages and these stem cells. So when I hear stem cells, and I kept on repeating these kind of like answers to these questions. I said, well, let me write a book to help people understand what these things are about. So I wrote a book called The Future of Regenerative Medicine, and it talks about all kinds of stem cells, and then it moves into the actual cell-free side of it, and then talks about the actual signals, and then where it's moving into, which is topical. Because when you can do a topical application and not do the needle, it's pretty aggressive, it's invasive, risk factors of like, more importantly, like infection, because you can have a dirty site and bring bacteria or viruses in there. So once you can get that component and eliminate those risk factors and the cost, now you got something fun. Now you got something that actually has the ability to heal tissue that you don't need the injection, the cost. And the neat thing about it now, it's moving into botanica, plant based. That's where it's going to be really interesting. And that's what I'm excited about. That's where Regen is moving into right now.
Okay. And so you're one of the challenges in terms of the technology is making it so that that topical can effectively penetrate the skin at the appropriate size to get to the tissues below. I mean, that must be a
Yeah, that
challenge in itself.
Yeah, believe it or not, here's the thing. There's so much research and testing that's done. For instance, like the transdermal agent is utilized right now by the FDA. We use the same thing. It's just that they use it for a different purpose. I use it for this purpose. So it was an easy marriage into this thing. So I knew it worked because it's already proven out there. They already utilize this thing to, deliver their pharmaceutical products in there. It was just about the size of it. So once I matched the size, I understood it. Well, it's an easy one. That's why it's allowed to go through there. But moving to where I want to go to is an interesting thing where now I'm trying to get all botanica, all plant based. And that includes that pharmaceutical side of the transdermal component. So the interesting thing about that is that, of course, once I went through the R&D and I've got some great test results right now, I pulled a patent and now we'll see where it goes. And I'm crossing my fingers.
What is a transdermal agent? Is that the way that it's actually applied?
Yeah, no, it's basically a solvent called DMSO, if you ever heard of that. I think it's an old 60s, our parents used to rub it on their joints. Well, that's a transdermal, and it has the ability to actually carry those little substances through the skin.
And is there much resistance from traditional medicine? Do you ever find that in your work?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, here's a tough thing is that I say 60 to 75% of clinicians that are in the regenerative world don't know what stem cells really do. They don't know the mechanisms. They have the good buzzwords of like, it differentiates, it's a pluripotent, multipotent, it turns into the cell, but it stops there. They don't understand about what mechanism. They just don't understand, who, what, where, they just don't. So that's where the gray area is at. Nobody knows. And you just have to go back to biology. Well, if you go to biology and know about like replication and mitosis, how does it do that? And they can't explain that. So then you take the next step, well, it's got to be the signal. And it goes, well, that makes more sense because you can take that same information and put it in anybody and it'll do its job because you're not changing chromosomes. You're not changing any DNA sequence. You're just taking the existing tissue that's dormant and waking it up and say, go, do your job.
Is there anything else people can do if they're interested in improving the quality of the signaling across the body? And is this where it just comes back to those sensible things like exercise, eat well, stretch?
Hey, that's the secret. The three big things, right? Diet, exercise, and stress. That's a big thing. I mean, that's going to really like understand your future. That's what's going to happen. So I know it's tough. And then, if someone's really objective and they really want to identify what's going on, to do that type of, change in your life and be that person as far as like healthy eating, exercise, and decrease stress, it's behavior. You have to change your behavior. And a lot of people are not willing to do that. That's the tough thing.
And what about the role of just chronic inflammation? If you are stressed and you've got that inflammation and you've got some symptoms, it's like a little bit of eczema or what would you recommend? I mean, obviously, number one, that's going to slow down any recovery.
Yeah. Chronic inflammation is probably the worst thing for your body. Just think about what you're doing. You're taking inflammation. So people like they just think it's swelling, right? Well, you got to understand that you're looking at cells, and cells have this kind of like this. It sits in like a kind of like a pool, right? So it's like a little bunch of little rafts in a pool, and then you want to add more water in that pool, but you don't have the ability to go up in elevation. So you're starting to squeeze. You're starting to squeeze like the ceiling of the pool area, right? And then what's going to happen? These cells are getting compressed, and it's not allowed to have a good ability to like do its job. Like take in a breath, push out. Do that oncotic world. So you have to decrease that pressure, and that is linked to inflammation, chronic inflammation. So that's why sometimes you have like hypertension because your blood pressure is increased because it has to fight through all that tough area where you're kind of combating against. So when you look at chronic inflammation, you don't really see it outside. It's mostly in the visceral. And then when you look at the small vessels, it's being challenged. So it starts going down that pathway like, well, we have to combat that. So what do we do? I don't want a lot of people take medication. So you'll start doing something that looks like it's supposed to help out, but you have side effects from that medication. So then you go down that road of taking more medication to fight off the side effects of that. So inflammation in the chronic state, you have to remind yourself that it's also part of the autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system is sympathetic, parasympathetic. And when we fire that off in the sympathetic side of it, it does the worst. So you have inflammation, then you have the sympathetic, and the sympathetic does what they do is constrict the vessels in your arms and legs, and it kind of like pulls all the blood from that area and puts in the core. So you're finding out that are you going to fight or flight? You're going to figure out something, but in a long period of time, it's not good for us. Poor circulation. Now you got inflammation. Now you're starting to feel like I don't feel healthy because I'm not getting proper nutrients to my legs. And you start getting these things called like radon and low circulation. Your hands and feet are decreasing. And then your autonomic nervous system goes haywire. Now you're starting to feel, you know, panic when you shouldn't feel panic. It just turns on because it doesn't know how to regulate. So
Mm.
that's why inflammation is very crucial. In a injury state, we need that. But when you look for chronic, like long period of time, you've got to reduce that. And it could be onset by food, like there's sensitivity in certain foods, stress, of course. Stress, you can have a secondary from stress, then it goes to sympathetic, then you have the inflammatory process. It all, goes hand in hand in some side of it. And then the worst thing about it, it may lead to something like your body gets depressed, your immune system drops down, and all of a sudden it comes back up really strong and hard, but now it becomes too strong and it starts going into the world of autoimmune. It starts attacking your own tissue. So that's why it's very important about those three variables. And when you look at wellness and health and longevity, exercise, diet, and stress, you've got to get control of that thing. And then you walk into the world of behavior changes.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting that it comes back to simple things and people resist those simple things because they go, well, it's not convenient or it's not comfortable or whatever. And you can really kickstart the healing process, but also just the process of feeling better, increasing your health span. And you don't have to start extreme. It can be with very minor changes. Just go for 5 minutes outside in the morning. That's going to be a
Yeah.
good start.
I think what people do when they go into like some type of workout, a New Year's resolution or something else, and they look at the short term, they say, 3 months, I want to drop 20 pounds. If you think long term, think 2 years, 3 years, think long term, it gives you the ability to make mistakes. And he goes, I got time. Don't worry about it. Just get back on the bicycle, ride, take a fall. It's okay, get back on. But when you take a short term goal and all of a sudden you miss that one meal, that one exercise, oh, I give up. Forget it. I'm off schedule. I'm done. That's why it's tough. That's why it's important to understand about the long game. You want that long process of finding out where you at, how to become that person in that 2, 3 year, 5 year mark.
Thoughts on supplements, electrolytes to increase signaling or creatine or any of these things that are very trendy?
I think all of it is good and in moderation. You just have to understand you're not gonna like take a supplement that says, all right, this is gonna replace a meal. You're gonna have to eat a regular set of food, make your macros and micros and all that stuff. And if you work out and you do a lot of sweating, you're gonna have to replace that. You can do it in the food, but it's faster with a liquid form. Take that electrolyte, but don't take electrolyte like a heavy type of sodium. glucose or sugar and potassium. When you're sitting around at a desk and doing nothing, you think I have to replenish. I mean, what are you replenishing, right? You're not doing anything. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so true. It's so true. People get obsessive as well. And you see some of these electrolyte formulas and it's sugar and you go, you're just causing more inflammation. Why would you take that?
I think it's a fun product to play around with because it's a nice buzzword. Electrolyte sounds so cool. Then you can, there's tablets, there's gums, there's all kinds of neat thing about that.
Yeah.
So I get it. It's a business, but
Yeah, it's
if
a business.
but if you just understood about your process for working out and how much you exert and you start sweating, well, you just have to replenish that. If you sweat a good amount, I mean, if you take if you take 1 gallon of sweat and you lose 8 pounds, well, you better get it back in your body or your kidneys are gonna get stressed out. So you have to have that mental state of understanding your body like a car, a mechanic. Just understand that.
Yeah. Where do you think we end up in the future, especially in regenerative medicine? Anything on the horizon that's interesting you? Is it personalization based on your specific DNA? What do you see?
I think it has to come down to the world of chromosomes and that little cap called telomeres. Telomeres is where it's at. There are great findings and discoveries about that. Understanding that is going to give ourselves the chance to live to 120, 130 years old. It's that little guy right there. That is the information that you have to signal to that guy. And the information that it sends out to that telomeres to go into its elongation to keep going, that replication, keep being a cell, is the enzyme telomerize. That enzyme is existing, our body. We have it when we're young, but once we hit puberty, it slows down and it starts declining as we older we get. So that's a tough thing. But there's going to be something out there that's going to, you know, we have it in our body. We just have to somehow understand how to get back to its enzyme state that's potent at that later stage in our life.
Fascinating. Yeah. And I mean, I read a study that said a regular meditation practice can maybe not lengthen, but slow down the degradation of the telomeres, which is very interesting to think that just stopping and meditating for, I think it was 10 minutes a day, can have that effect.
Like anything, look, anything that you can reduce the stress, because stress does. When you look at stress, stress is probably the worst thing in our body. I mean, stress in the short term is fantastic because we need to, if you want to build muscle, you got to stress out the body, work out, but you need the other side of that coin to recover. You need to get back to neutral, get back to itself. The quicker you are back there, the better you're off. The problem with some people, if it's athletes or just, person that stresses out, they continue to get that stress. You beat yourself down. Well, guess what? That stress decreases telomeres. That telomere starts replicating and it starts chewing it down. Once it gets to a certain level, it goes into like a zombie state called senescence. And then it just sits there. It can't do anything because those caps are protecting those DNAs to not mismatch. Because if you start mismatching, you start walking in the world of cancer, right? So that's why they're there. Now, if we can just figure out a really strong pattern of getting those telomeres lengthened all the time, but control it, wow, you're gonna have something fantastic, and I think that we're gonna see that in the next 10, 20 years.
So interesting. And then, of course, combined with maybe the occasional fast to get the autophagy effect or something, you get rid of the zombie cells, use treatments such as yours on injuries, and you've got a pretty nice toolkit for life.
Absolutely. Everything is good in moderation. You just don't get carried away. Fasting is great. Don't do a 96-hour fasting every other day. I mean,
Yeah.
every 96 days or 96 hours, right? You just have to understand your limitations and understand what your
Yeah.
body's going through.
I mean, because exactly, people who get too obsessed with fasting, what they don't realize is that they're putting their body into stress, and that's kind of negating the benefits of what they're doing.
I had a friend that went through a fast, I think of 48 hours over the weekend, and then he did probably like one of those ultra marathons, but he went through a hike, right? And he lost weight, and that was the goal. But then I had to explain to him that you got to be careful because your body needs energy, glucose, right? It's going to get it from somewhere. You think you're getting it from fat, but if you do an extreme workout too fast, it goes to a thing called gluconeogenesis, right?
Yeah.
It breaks down proteins in your muscle. So the way he lost is not really the adipose or the fat tissue; it was muscle tissue. So you just have to understand what you're trying to do. Fasting is good, but just don't work out to extreme level because you're going to break down the wrong tissue.
Yeah, I've experienced that myself. I went through a phase where I was doing this really intense running up this small mountain near where I live. And no matter what I did, I was really stressed in my day to day work, but I just couldn't get rid of that last like 10% of belly fat. And I didn't realize, but it was just through research. It was like, well, what are your stress levels like? Because your body's holding on to that in case it needs it later. People forget.
Yeah. You know, the weird thing about, like, our body and knowing where our fat storage cells are at, people think that you can just lose fat. You shrink fat. The fat cells are always gonna be there. So the big secret is diet, and it's exercise is important, of course, but it's all about diet, what you put in your body, and stress. Stress, because your stress goes up, cortisone, it's gonna do its job of basically holding things on real tight and saving just in case it thinks like, "Oh, I'm stressed out. Maybe there's gonna be a famine in the next week. I don't know. Let's store everything as fast as possible and keep it for that winter month that we have to have some type of like no food or something." So that's why you have to be careful with that.
Tell us, as maybe a final point, how has dyslexia affected your work, especially as a writer? I know that you see it as a strength.
Well, I see it as a strength because it makes you think different. It makes you look at challenges in business and anything like it's no big deal. It's like it's part of the product. It's like my everyday process. So when I see people that have like a normal type of like, like brain cells and function stuff like that, and they go through they have a hurdle, they have some challenge, they stop. They are analyzing, they look around, they go, how do I do this? And they'll look for all the researches and something to figure out how to cross that barrier. Whereas like people like us, we just keep moving. We'll walk around. We'll do 20 attempts to go around that, and that includes like what I do when I write a book, when I read. I have to do in a different methodology. I have to look at it differently. I have to say, hey, let me work backwards. Let me just work. Let me do the conclusion. Let me do the middle and go to the beginning, and then somehow we just kind of blow. You just put it on the floor and just kind of like maneuver like a jigsaw puzzle, and then it starts forming out. And then I said, okay, I see it now. It's starting to form. So you just have to be creative. And it allows me to be in this world of entrepreneur of just like no big deal. There's challenges across the board. We all know about challenges and they're going to come across. And then if you don't have any challenges, it's more likely you're not progressing. You're not doing anything you're supposed to do. You're probably stagnant or declining. So I always see that as a positive thing. So when I see a turtle, I'm like, hey, here we go. Another one. We're moving forward. Let's cross that and just take different approaches. So just like reading and math and numbers, I have to do it in a different way. I have to kinda look at it like I have to look at the number in the middle, and start at the back, and then start the front, and then just take a little longer process.
Hmm.
Do I know that there's no cure for it. I hate to say that, people think, "Oh, you can you cure it?" I don't think so because the big thing is that when people tell me a phone number over the phone and they say it in a normal pace, I'm like, "Wait a minute, what? What happened here?" And I hear it, I goes, wait a minute, did he say 7 or 5?" Then I have to just slow it down and I say, "Give that to me again," and then, the first attempt is kinda mixed up and then it goes smooth after that, so it's
Mm,
still there, but you just have to work around it, and that's why I think it's a teaches people like us, you're gonna be challenged, it's gonna be there, who cares? Just keep going.
it actually just ingrains that growth mindset. You'll figure it out, problem solving. There's a way.
Nothing disturbs us. If you listen to any dyslexia person, it's like you can throw anything. It's no big deal. I mean, I've been challenged worse than this and just reading, so it's like, what's the big deal with this?
How can people find your book and connect with you, find out more about the topicals?
Yeah, you can get my book on Amazon. The book title is The Future of Regenerative Medicine, and just type my last name after that, Rhee, and you'll pop up, and then there it is. And then also there's my website, HEEGEN.com. And then you can learn about a topical stem cell. And if you have any questions, just hit the info button and then shoot me a question.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. You've explained a few things that I wasn't clear about, especially the power of that signaling, something that we often forget about. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Any final thought for those who stuck with us all the way to the end?
Hey, guys, you made it, man. We made it. I hope you didn't get bored.
Dr. Tommy, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And everyone, do check out the links in the show notes. You'll find them all there. Thanks again.